Joanne Wilson, and this is Positively Gotham Gal. Real, honest, and meaningful conversations with women entrepreneurs about their approach to life, business, and everything in between. Frances Donner is a New York Times gender director and the editor of In Her Words, a 3-times-a-week column that examines women's issues globally. We got together to discuss women's positions in the workforce and the impact that COVID has made in the labor market. Where are you, Francesca? It looks beautiful. I can see out your window there.
Oh, I didn't realize it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am in Connecticut.
Nice, very nice. It's beautiful this weekend.
The nutmeg state.
All right, let's begin. So I want to start talking about, why are women leaving the workplace en masse? Are they coming back after COVID? Or they're just like, screw this, I'm done with having the responsibility of my kids, my family, my life, being in an environment that just sucks. I mean, why do you think women are just leaving the workplace en masse?
I can't believe that you just led with that question. That's the $1 million question. And I think there are lots of answers to it. And I think we should just spend a moment to look at exactly who is leaving the workplace en masse. And for what reasons. You certainly mentioned, you said why, and there are different reasons. But we've seen actually over this past year, a lot of women dropping out of the workforce by choice. And I'm going to raise the P word here. Do you know what that word is?
I don't know what the P word is.
Privilege.
100%.
It is a privilege for many people to be able to say, I'm going to stop work because I can't take it anymore. And I don't want to suggest for a moment that the people who can't take it anymore are weak or haven't been going through an absolutely awful time. But to be able to leave the workplace by choice assumes that you have an economic foundation that you are able to leave the workplace. So maybe you have a partner who is bringing in income. Maybe you have enough in savings that you can say, okay, I think I can do this for the next, 6 months or a year or however long this lasts, and I will be okay. And I think it's really worth pointing out that, yes, absolutely, lots of women dropped out of work by choice, but a lot of women also weren't able to drop out of work by choice. So it's a really odd thing to kind of kick off this conversation about women who've been having such a really, really rotten time this past year with the P word. But I think that you have to really start out by kind of distinguishing who's leaving and on what terms. So, of course, a lot of people left by choice, but a lot of people left because their jobs were eliminated, because they were the lowest on the totem pole. They were the last ones in, the first ones out. In other countries, you saw people being furloughed. So there's a whole lot of reasons that kind of goes into that problem.
But we don't see that we don't see that for men.
You have not seen as many men leaving the workplace by choice.
Exactly.
And I will say this, at the start of the pandemic, we saw a whole lot of women losing jobs. And the first thing we thought was, oh my goodness, is this a she session? Is this different from the recessions of the past that predominantly affected men? And in many ways, it kind of started out like that. You had industries where there were a lot of women really particularly hard hit, things like retail, restaurants, things like that. And you saw a lot of women losing jobs. But actually, as the months went on, we found out that this was not strictly speaking a she session. You actually saw the numbers kind of balance out so that men were losing jobs as well. They also work in those industries. And I think it's very hard to say, it's hard, and it's actually not just hard, it's not correct to say only women were affected in this recession. It's just not accurate. We have
No.
seen that men and women have been affected.
Absolutely.
And I think that, that was sort of the initial take on it was very specifically women, and now things have balanced out a little bit. And now looking at the jobs numbers, we got the July jobs numbers today.
Yes.
And you start seeing that women are really, the numbers of women going, back to work are really high. But I think what the question you might be asking me is, what is the difference between men and women here? Because maybe the top line numbers don't look so very different from one another. But to me, it all comes down to my favorite thing, which is unpaid labor. Childcare.
Childcare. Domestic labor.
Domestic labor. If I may, I think it's worth just taking a minute to just talk about what unpaid labor is.
Agreed. Let's do it.
We all know it because we all do it. And unpaid labor is basically all of those things that happen in the household that, quote unquote, someone has to do. Someone has to unload the dishwasher. Someone has to pick up the toys. Someone has to get the kids to school if school is open.
Someone has to buy the kids clothes.
Someone has to buy the kids clothes. And even more significantly, someone has to keep track of all these things. So I think a lot about, households that say, oh, we're very equal. We really balance out all the tasks. Maybe in a heterosexual household where there's a husband and wife, and the husband always goes to the wife and says, "Hon, I'm here. What can I do? How can I help? What task can you give me?" Well, that's wonderful. Not criticizing that at all. It's great to have a helper. But even the act of managing that list of, oh my goodness, what do I need him to do? Okay, I know that we probably need groceries. I didn't go to the grocery store on Friday as I usually go. And thinking ahead about dinner, we've got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Okay, so if you can get the things for dinner, okay, great. So what should I get? Oh, okay.
Here's a list.
On Monday, we can do chicken and broccoli. And then Tuesday, what we'll do is we'll have the leftovers from that. And we'll put those in the sandwiches. So that'll be fine for the camp. So like all of this stuff is so massive and takes up such a massive part of your brain. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, there's like the tasks that just sort of need to get done. Someone needs to load the dishwasher. Someone needs to do the laundry. Someone needs to, manage the homeschooling. But I also think that, we call it the mental load. You probably knew that. The mental load is so ginormous, and it's something that isn't always sort of meted out equally. So even if you kind of drew a list and you said, okay, well, he's going to do washing the car and he's going to do the laundry and she's going to do this. My question is kind of who's really thinking about all those things underpinning those activities?
Right. Who's the manager of all this?
Who's the manager and who wants that job? Not me. So another couple of thoughts on unpaid labor. Firstly, women in every country in the world do more unpaid labor than men. Every country, even the gold standard Scandinavian countries where you can kind of think, oh, well, maybe there, it's a little different.
No way.
Women still do more unpaid labor. And of course, the unpaid labor is much worse for women in poverty who have to walk miles every day to go get water and are, responsible in really challenging ways for getting food on the table and making ends meet when there is literally no money. And, so unpaid labor just kind of really kind of goes up and down depending on the resources that you have, of course. But it is true that every woman in every country basically does more unpaid labor than men. The other thing that I think is quite interesting about unpaid labor is that when we look at the different tasks that men and women do, that falls under this umbrella of unpaid labor, we find that women often end up with the tasks that happen maybe multiple times a day, and men end up with those tasks that might happen once a week. So maybe men might do okay, I'll mow the lawn, I'll wash the car, and I'll organize I'll fix the Wi-Fi cable or whatever it is. Maybe that happens once a month. I don't know. And then women, maybe they get, okay, well, I'll do the packed lunches for school, I'll do the dishes, I'll do the cooking, and those are things that are happening multiple times a day. And so,
how do we break this?
Well, it's a big problem.
It's a huge problem. I mean, I've been thinking about it for years. It's like you enter a relationship. It doesn't make any difference, you know. It could be heterosexual. It could be a gay relationship. And when you're with someone for a long time, everyone falls into these categories. And over time, you know, I mean, I always made the meals. I always managed the kids. Even, you know, 35, 40 years in, I'm not going to come home one night and my husband's going to have made this glorious meal, because you fall into this cadence. But when it comes to privilege, so many women have left the workforce when they get to a certain point because they can, which sends this horrendous example to their children. And so then we repeat the cycle. And, you know, I have a lot of friends that are millennials and younger. And I think, okay, is this the generation where everything's going to become more equal? And it's the same thing.
Yeah, I'm nodding at you. Yeah, I want to pick up on two of those things. I want to actually go back to the idea of women leaving the workforce by choice. So in those privileged households, there was undoubtedly a discussion between the couple, and they said, okay, school is closed, or some like horrendous hybrid version of school is happening, or it happens on Monday and suddenly it's closed on Tuesday, and I'm trying to do Zoom meetings and the children are all over me, and this is a nightmare, right? Everyone agrees with that.
Everybody.
And then let's say the couple says, you know what, we've looked at our savings and we know that we can financially sustain this family on just one income. Well, let's ask the question, the next obvious question in my mind to ask is, well, okay, well, what is each person making? So let's say the man is making more than the woman, which he probably is, because
Correct.
There is still a gender
problem with that, 100%.
So then you say, okay, well, economically, surely it makes sense to have the person with the smaller salary step back than the person with the larger salary.
Yep.
And most of the time, the person with the larger salary is the man. And so economically, it makes sense to say, okay, well, I'll step back. The woman, the wife, whatever, the mum, will step back because we need your bigger salary while we're only on one salary. So that's kind of the economic problem of it. And I think that, you know, there's the cultural problem as well, of course, which is, you know, look, culturally, these are kind of, you know, you said, oh, you know, for years I've made the meals and I've done this and that. And, you know, culturally, that's what we grow up seeing and learning. And, you know, when we all know this, right? And so I think it's very hard to change those norms of maybe what your childhood has been, maybe what your marriage has been or your partnership has been. Even in same-sex partnerships, there can be sort of, you know, the breadwinner and then the person who's primarily responsible for taking care of the kids. And it's hard to switch that. Ever.
Once you start that road, it's like that way forever. And the other part of that is, and I don't think people think about this when they're like, okay, honey, I'll stay home and take care of all this stuff. You go to work because it makes sense, is that they fast forward, all the kids leave the house. And I see this time and time again. And these women are like, who am I? What am I? And they're so lost and so unhappy. But they've had this sort of life for the last 20 some odd years, and they don't want to really go back to the workplace, but they want to do something where they feel that, you know, at least they wake up with some kind of meaning every morning.
Mm-hmm. I know. I mean, everyone wants to be valued. As far as I can tell, every human I've ever met wants to be valued and have a purpose.
Yes.
And I mean, I think you raised such a great point, and I think it's just devastating. It can feel devastating and lonely and isolating to feel that your purpose, which maybe was your kids for however long, suddenly no longer needs you. And then what? And I think that, you know, sure. I mean, I think there have been certain workplaces that have tried really hard to kind of bring women back in, but there is also kind of a bias against hiring people who haven't worked for the past 10 years. The question you might ask is, well, why haven't you worked? If you're raising children, are you really committed to the job? Do you have any skills that are applicable in 2021? You know, I see you went to whatever brilliant college back in, 1999, but I mean, what does that mean? Ageism, of course, sexism, all of these things kind of coming into play. And we know that if a person, well, I'll say a woman specifically, gets out of work and leaves that track, the harder it is to get back in. And
it's extremely hard.
Extremely hard.
Yeah, and I've said to women who have 10-year gaps, it's just like, just put on there, you were the CEO of a family. And I co-chair of a new organization that I'm no longer co-chairing, but it still exists, which is called Path Forward. And, we trained a bunch of women who went to those fancy schools and helped them re-enter the workplace. I mean, they didn't even know what Zoom was or, Slack. I mean, simple things that if you have a brain, it doesn't take much to get up to speed. But on the other hand, and in every work environment that they entered, they were wonderful for those environments because they came at it from such a different angle.
Yeah. But that requires a hiring manager with great imagination.
Oh, for sure.
possibly quite a lot of empathy. And I'm really, really curious, especially after this year, to see whether people are comfortable kind of saying, look, I took this time off for my family. It was a terrible time. We can all agree on that. I was CEO and I did all of these volunteer projects and really sort of get to, I know there's kind of been an edging towards this, but to really get comfortable and say, with some element of pride, look, this is what I did in those years. But you need a hiring manager who's going to have been there, who gets it, who sort of looks beyond, oh, but you don't know how to use Slack, to, oh, you're clearly a really smart person who can pick up Slack in about 10 seconds and it's going to be fine.
I think those people have to be championed, those people.
Right. Not to mention, okay, I know you haven't been working kind of consistently on the treadmill over these past 10 years, but what you do bring, as you said, are all these other skills. And because you've been a family manager, you're probably super efficient, pretty great with budgets, good at sort of finding the balance between yelling and kindness. Micro manager when you need to be, macro manager when you need to be, and you have a great product at the end of it. They just left for college. So I think if we can be a little bit more imaginative about who we hire and what skills we're looking for. And I think in a way, it requires kind of putting humanity back into hiring. There's been I feel like, over the years, hiring has become so sort of automated that God knows where your resume goes into the black hole. And
totally,
it's running through searching for keywords and God knows what they are. And I was just listening to a thing on the radio yesterday on NPR, and there was this woman, and she had a civil engineering degree or something, and she lived in Georgia, and her husband had gotten a job in California, and she was trying to get a job out there, and she said, I look at the job requirements and I match 90% of them, but it says, oh, you have to have this kind of degree, and because I have this civil engineering degree, which, by the way, how many of us could actually get it? I mean, hello.
Totally.
Pretty brilliant degree, but suddenly that rules her out. And I think, you know, that also, I'm going to raise the other problem, which I bet you know where I'm going on this one, which is when men versus women look at job descriptions and they look at all the requirements of the job, and the man looks at it and he might say, oh, you know, I can do whatever, a couple of these things. I'm definitely qualified for the job. No problem, I'll apply. And the woman looks at it and looks at the sort of list of bullet points and says, okay, well, I can do that. Yes, that. Yeah. I don't know. It says I need to speak French and I can only sort of. So I probably shouldn't apply.
100%. Women do not apply to jobs. I mean, I've seen this time and time again. Even companies or small firms that have literally not pushed the jobs out to male-centric sites and have done it to female sites, hoping that that will spur. And they look at it, they're like, oh, I'll never get that job, so why should I apply? I mean, listen, the woman who runs one of the largest accounting firms in this country, she said when they, I'm having a blank on the company, when they were looking for a new CEO, they came to her office and said, we want you to apply for this job. And she said, well, you know, I don't know if I'm the right person for this job because this, and I don't want to just be like a woman who's on the list so it can make you guys look good. And they're like, no, you have all the qualifications. And she did get that job. But what you said about your abilities, I've always been a big fan of hiring people based on their skill set, not necessarily their industry perspectives. You know, and when you do that, you get better people.
So this raises another thought for me, which is, if women are sitting there looking at all these bullet point requirements and saying, okay, I only make 80% of them and therefore I'm not qualified and I shouldn't apply for this job, why don't we just change the job description?
Good question.
I mean, since when did job descriptions have to have this format and this layout? And then, you know, hiring managers get pickier and pickier and they say, oh, you know what? It would be nice to have a person who speaks German. That could be occasionally useful. And it would be nice to have, you know, a person who's had experience in communications. We should probably add that in. Suddenly you're looking for, you know, some kind of, you know, wizard. These are almost always like male terms, you know, like a wizard or a guru or whatever. And I'm sort of thinking, well, if that is ruling people out, why don't we just stop?
That's a great question. Why don't we just, I for one, I was like, well, what's the job? You know, what is the description of the job? Now, the description of the job is a better way of getting more people interested in what the job is. It's not so much you must do this, but so that everyone clearly understands and is defined within the company, this is the job description we're looking for. And by the way, you could hire something and everything could like fall into the can the next day. The person you're hired to, you know, report to is fired, and all of a sudden your entire job structure changes. And so there is this sort of structure that makes no sense. Do you think that...
Wait, I have one thought on that. I know
Yes.
being a bit ridiculous and facetious, but I mean, literally, when have you ever taken a job, been 2 weeks into it, and referred back to the bullet points that were absolutely required for this position and been like, oh yes, well, I'm definitely speaking German in the job as requested? I mean, when you take, well, certainly many jobs, when you take them, they are spelled out in some way that's kind of theoretical. And I'm not talking about very literal jobs of you must put the socks in the box or something like that. But, you know, many white collar jobs, you're also supposed to bring your own kind of perspective to it, carve it out a little bit, start making relationships, and suddenly what you thought, and maybe even what the company thought it needed, is actually completely transformed. And
completely. And you have this job and it doesn't even fit the bullet points. I totally agree. So what do you think, what are you hearing and what are you seeing? And when it comes about, you know, this next generation of younger women who are, you know, sort of delaying everything, you know, delaying their access to the workplace, to education, to their family, or burnout or fear of failure. I mean, there's so much media and so much press out there that it could scare the shit out of you. You could end up like never leaving your house. Do you think it's going to change with the next generation as they're entering the workplace, that everyone's going to be a freelance person and only work 4 days a week?
Yeah, that was like 100 questions. Thank you. But there's a lot kind of loaded into this next generation question. So I think, perhaps where you were starting with this question is, some of the reporting we did was looking at younger women in poor families, perhaps where there was a single parent trying to raise all the children at once. And what some of our reporting has shown is that very often it comes to the young woman or girl to help out. And what we found was
like in 1700s.
Sort of. I mean, here's the deal. These young women and probably even girls were always helping out. They were always helping babysit or make meals and being a big part of the sort of family. But I think what we've seen, because COVID has kind of cracked it all open, is this becoming even a bigger problem. And it's a problem because it's unpaid labor. And when you're doing unpaid labor, as we talked about before, it means you're not progressing economically or in terms of your education or whatever that is. And so when what we found talking to young women is them saying, okay, you know what, my dream was to go to college, or I really needed to go and work at the local restaurant to start making some money so that I can afford to go to college. But I had to put all of that on hold because literally my mother is working 3 jobs. There is nobody to watch the children because the childcare centers are shut down. Even if they were open, we probably couldn't afford them. The schools are a disaster. And so you kind of end up with this sort of morass where young girls, young women are kind of filling the gap. And I think this is, it's quite simply a mirroring of what's happened with women at every age and
forever.
Frankly, in all different kinds of households, we have seen that women plugged the gap. And it didn't, this past year, what's been so interesting is it didn't really matter if you were a very wealthy woman, those privileged women that we talked about at the beginning, or you're from a very poor household. It was women plugging the gap and figuring out, oh my gosh, childcare, the disaster, and what are we going to do about it? And that's just, I hate to say it kind of boils down to childcare, but
what always boils down to childcare.
If you're looking after your children, you can't go to work. If you're changing a diaper, you can't really be on a Zoom. And there's no, there really isn't sort of infrastructure or support in place that is helping families. And all families need help.
All families need help, and it doesn't make any difference where you live. And women have been, from the beginning of time, the unpaid workers who fill in all of the dots in terms of raising a family and raising children. And would it make sense to have programs that, college programs, whatever it may be, where, you can't get a job as a teacher in a pre-K unless you have a degree in education, early child education? Should we be creating those education all the way down to starting at a 3-month-old so that that there's a public education system with qualified human beings that have degrees, that care very much and know how to take care of 3 months old till 3-year-olds when then they enter the pre-K system, so that we have an entire education system that allows women to be able to go back to the workforce or continue with their career, or allow the kids that are taking care of the family so the mother can have 3 jobs to go out and forge their own path.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about what you said is there are probably lots of different solutions that you probably don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. So
never in education, for sure.
Never in education. We certainly know that it's good for children and babies, I guess, to an earlier intervention is a really positive thing. So when we talk about pre-K and things like that we know is a really excellent, advantageous thing for young children. But I think when we are looking at kind of the problem of childcare, I think a lot about all the different kinds of needs that people have based on where they are. So you could imagine a program kind of going wrong if we said, okay, we're going to give everybody a coupon to spend at their local, for local childcare, or to spend on a babysitter. Well, that might be fantastic if you live in a very populated place like New York City or whatever. But what if you're in a rural area and you're sitting there with your coupon and you're saying, well, this is great, but the childcare center down the street closed. The other nearest one is an hour and a half away.
Yes.
There are no sitters to be had because every woman who's college age is literally upped and left. And so there's nobody for me to hire, even if I could, even if I wanted to. And so that makes me kind of wonder about really creative solutions. And I think maybe you were kind of hinting at it a little bit before, like, what if we could go to certain rural communities and provide training for people to, maybe there's a lot of moms who would really like to start their own creche, but where do they get started? How do they get funding? What do they need to know? What childcare education do they need to have? What are the rules? What are the regulations? What do they need to know if they want to serve snack? What are the hygiene?
What's the oversight?
And exactly. And I sort of think, this is kind of, maybe this is sort of Pollyanna to kind of think about it this way, but I do think you have to recognize that people's needs in different kinds of communities are just so very different. And so that's kind of what worries me in a way about sort of some giant, like, oh, it's all great, we're just gonna throw more money at the problem. And by the way, I would love more money thrown at
I would love more money too, but I agree with you that it's no different than any industry. Is just because it works in New York doesn't mean it works in Peoria.
Exactly. I think that, you've probably read quite a bit about the child tax credits, and I think that's very, very, very powerful. It's powerful because it's money meted out over time. By the way, just in case anyone doesn't know, it's around $300 per child per family, kind of based on your income and the age of your child. And hopefully most of your listeners have been receiving those checks or,
exactly.
or deposits. So that, I think, is really powerful because it's money meted out over time. And what I have read is that when money comes in a sort of lump form, people are more likely to spend it on one big project, like, oh, we needed to buy a car and therefore we're going to save that money for that. But when it is sort of spaced out over time, and this happens as a monthly installment, I guess, then you're more likely to spend it on what it's kind of intended for, which in this case is maybe it's children or in food or clothes or back to school. And I think that this is really powerful because it's empowering, because it's saying, your family best, your needs best. Mm-hmm. This no strings attached is really wonderful in my mind. We're not going to say, oh, but it can only be used on schools, because you might homeschool your child. And actually what's really important for you is to get all the materials that you need and to enroll your kid in the local soccer club so that your kid can have some socialization.
Yeah. I don't know how they are tracking the data of where all that money is going once it is in the hands of the parents, but I agree with you is that most people are going to do the right thing with the capital.
At least the reporting that I've seen so far, and kind of based on sort of talking to economists and things like that, it seems that is what is happening. Of course, I'm sure some people will not spend it on
there's always
their kids,
there's
but
yes,
I mean, or their
but
family or whatever.
right.
But you know best. If your house has a hole in the roof and it makes your house a dangerous place for your family to be, and that $300 is best spent actually patching the hole in your roof, great.
So be it.
You know. So
Totally.
I think that's quite an exciting thing. And by the way, we're going to be reporting on that because we want to talk to families and see how it's working for them and how much of a difference that's making, or whether it disappears all too fast. I mean, it's a large amount of money, but also people have bills to pay. So
People have bills to pay. I mean, it'll be interesting from reporting perspective, talking to multiple families from different economic backgrounds, is what is it that would have changed your life or would change it now based on the age of your child that would have made an impact on you returning to the workplace or continuing with your career. Because I think most women at one point, when their kids are all in school, or when their kids go off to college, or it could just be when their kids are sleeping, look in the mirror and think to themselves, who are you? What happened to me? Like, I've lost all sense of self. And it has nothing to do with not loving your children or loving the decisions you've made for your life. But what kills me is that the cycle just continues to repeat. And the reality is, women are the ones that rule the world. But somehow or other, the men think they do. And so certainly with women not getting paid for all of this, if it wasn't for us, I mean, everything would fall into a big, huge abyss.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we should, I like that phrase, but maybe we should reframe it as women are the ones who hold together the world.
Yes. We hold it up.
I mean, it's if you think of a very traditional heterosexual household where there's a man and a woman, and if the man had to leave the house and get in his car and drive to work knowing that there were 2 babies in the house crying with dirty diapers and no one to take care of them, would he be getting in the car and driving to work? Of course not. But there is someone to take care of them. It's the default. It's the woman. It's the mother. It's sort of so, it's so obvious, but sometimes you kind of have to point it out. And I'm also thinking, you mentioned once again, sort of back to work and this year has been such a stalled year for women.
And it's still stalling.
And it's still stalling. Oh my God, it's still stalling.
I think it's fundamentally changed everything that we don't even know how much it's changed everything.
Well, hold on to that thought because we need to talk about that. But I think I think about sort of the economic stalling, even if you didn't leave your job, with that extra burden of childcare. And these new BLS numbers are showing that basically women did an entire full-time job taking care of children in addition to their jobs, if they were doing those jobs. Which makes sense as to why did some women leave the workplace? Oh, because they were already doing a full-time job taking care of their kids.
They burn out.
And the men, according to the BLS data, did about half of that. So I don't want to say they weren't pulling half of their weight. But when you're doing that full-time childcare job, it also means maybe you're not working as many hours. Maybe you're not angling for that promotion that you can probably do. Maybe there's a job that actually you even meet all those bullet points that we talked about that you don't apply for because you just think it's not possible. Maybe you dial back to flexible or part-time, which is also really, really, really hard to get out of. Once you're kind of on that track, you're on that track, and that's a problem. And so all of these things, all of these kind of decisions that women probably thought, I just can't do it this year. I had this thought half the time last year. I have 3 kids. That's a lot of kids.
How old are they?
10, 8, and 2. So I have a toddler, which should just, make you stop in your tracks. So last year, I was employed full-time, but there were many, many, many times when I said, I desperately want to do this project, but I can't. I have to table it. I'll do it next year. I'll think about that another time, because I didn't have the hours in the day. It wasn't a question of, it wasn't even me carving out self-care or anything of the sort. It was like, I'm doing all these things, and I have a, good supportive husband, and he was doing all the laundry, and we were doing all the school, but it was simply a question of I can't do it, or I'll do it so poorly. So
I have no bandwidth left.
Yeah, it's done. It's done. I mean, literally, unless I don't sleep. And we've read these stories of women who just, sort of almost stop sleeping. But I mean, how long is that sustainable?
Not very sustainable. And I wonder how many men would say, you know what? I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to the other question, which is, I mean, every day as I think about the post-COVID world, which we are so not in yet, and questionable when we will be, which is, I mean, it's just so crazy on so many levels, but I know there's so much that has changed, but I don't think we know how much has changed yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting positioning of how things are, because obviously a lot has changed. Obviously, we've been forced to stare at unpleasant things in the face, like unpaid labor and the closure of schools and what that means. And kind of, I'm quite scared that we are at this inflection point where everything could change in a positive way, but it might not.
Oh, I agree 100%.
And so I think, okay, for now, everything's changed, right? And everything's kind of in flux. We can't kind of put our stake in the ground and say, oh, this is what workplaces are right now.
Well, everything has been opened up. It's almost like you knew there were worms in that can.
Yeah.
But due COVID, it opened the can. And you're like, oh my God, the worms are really there.
Yeah. So the worms are really there, and they're all over, and it's very hard to put the worms back in the can. They're all flying all over the place, right?
It never happens. We always
really
move
gross.
forward. We never move backwards.
But so my concern is that I think we're going to kind of see this really interesting tension play out between people who say, and I'll talk about it in terms of the workplace for now, people who say, that's it, the workplace has mistreated people for so long, marginalized people, just shoved to the sidelines, people overlooked, it was an awkward place for introverts, people felt uncomfortable in meetings, all these sort of issues that were going on, and sexism and bias and harassment. So all of these things kind of have been open. So that's one part. And then there's this other part, and I see it often from, certain leaders who are saying, we're an in-person company, we're all back to work, be there or be square, everything's fine. I mean, they're not delusional, everything is not fine, but we want to get back. We want to get back to the way things are. And we know it'll be a little bit different, but ultimately, I think there could be a sort of slip and slide, slippery slope back to the DNA of work that we've always known, which is maybe 3 or 4, maybe for the next, right now it's a disaster, okay? Maybe then if things kind of settle a little bit, maybe we kind of have this hybrid model, a little bit more flexibility, and we're a bit more generous about, look, you have a life outside of work as well, and we care about self-care. But I wonder,
that'd be wonderful,
wouldn't it? If over time those things
slip
become
back
less and less, and the sort of rubber band springs back to its normal shape, and the DNA of the American workplace, which is loyalty to the company first, FaceTime, we're back to the pattern of, people who can stay for after work drinks, good on you. And I think, I don't think it's that way with everything. And I think there's a lot of people who are thinking a lot about this, and workplaces who are kind of thinking, we don't want to repeat this pattern. But I really wonder, are law firms suddenly going to say, we all need to take a personal day?
I don't know. We will see. I mean, I like your concept of the rubber band going back to normal. I mean, I went to an event, one of these art things. It was terrible. I mean, it was just brutal. And my friend who runs a gallery, she said to me,
why was it brutal?
Well, I felt that the event for Freeze that was at the Shed this year, there was no creativity. I felt as if it was a asset class event. And I thought, well, come on, like you can't have more creativity in this post-COVID world, and to bring in younger children and education and interest in the arts. I mean, I thought it was just absolutely horrible. And my friend who runs a gallery, she said to me, these things were so good that we had to go back to them. And so I was like, okay, well, who's going to be the one who's going to create the new ones?
Right. So that's exactly it. It's sort of, what normal are we running back to here? What normalized cultures or patterns were so great that we can't reinvent? And that applies to all sorts of things, from workplace to childcare to, sort of like how we operate our families. It really raises the question of who were the winners and who were the losers. Well, if you were a winner in the old way, pretty good. I don't want to lose that nice, status I had where all I had to do was show up for work and then, have a dinner cooked for me in the evening. I don't think it's that bad, but might be.
Well, it goes back to the concept of the data. I mean, I'm a huge fan of data. And if you look at the data in companies that actually care about their workers and care about families and care about you as an individual, that you have a separate life, you have a better workplace. You have a better return on your investment.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Yeah. The business case for keeping your employees, treating them humanely, is so huge. I mean, in many, I think, it's worth raising the B word, burnout, which is totally real. And I think, it's sort of, if you start hitting burnout, which so many people have hit this past year just because of everything, then it sort of almost doesn't matter like how much money you throw at the problem or the salary or the promotion. It's just sort of, I can't do this work. And you know what? I won't do this work. And I think we have to be really careful about treating employees like humans and sort of respecting the whole person rather than just kind of this sort of loyal slice of a person that, just to hide your children, hide your aging parents, hide your hobbies. We don't want to know that you do bicycle riding or whatever you do, and it's sort of, but we're humans. Like that's absolutely a part. I don't do bicycle riding, but all the other things, there's a big part of me. Why hide those things? Why? And let's go back to this idea of being quite creative about who we hire and think about, hey, maybe your bicycle riding actually might bring some pretty interesting ideas to the team because we never thought about. I don't know anything about bicycles. I don't even know why I brought them up. But maybe someone in the team might have a really interesting problem to a solution because of their experience with their bicycle riding.
Totally.
We should go ride some bikes.
What you bring out is that we should go ride some bikes. Is that mental health has become such a hot topic, which is something that was always like pushed under the carpet. And so I'm hoping that is something that's, raised in the workplace more and more, and understanding, everyone is an individual. Everyone has mental health issues. Everyone's going to burn out. And what does that balance look like?
Yeah. I think so. The reading I've kind of done around that is also a note of caution for workplaces, which is, look, giving everyone a week off or a day off is absolutely delightful, but it doesn't cure burnout.
No.
And I think that's kind of the exact sort of box that sort of looks like it's checked and everyone's sort of happy in the short term because yay, they don't have to work on Friday and that's great. But it's what we're really looking at is kind of over the long term, what are we asking you to shoulder and take on? Whether that is a question of we're literally asking you to do too much work and we don't provide you with enough resources or with enough team members, that's a bigger problem. And that requires real resources from the company to say, okay, either we're going to put more people on this team, or we're going to be more selective about the work that we do and say, we can't do this all. So we're going to table that thing and sort of prioritize and really think about what a normal human can or should be able to do. And I also think that, you know, the personal has to come into it now. I mean, it's sort of, you know, we've all been talking about, oh, back to work, September, but that's not happening now.
No, it's not.
And again, you know, we talked about these worms everywhere. Those worms are very hard to put back in the can. And, you know, as we start looking towards the fall and the winter, and Amazon already saying, oh, we don't even expect people back until January. Like, you can't unattach this personal and this professional, and people will work really hard, but they also need to be trusted, to be evaluated on what they're actually doing versus how friendly or chatty they are in the hallways.
Totally.
And to sort of be given the room to manage their families as best they can in these really tricky situations. But, you know, I worry so much. I look at, you know, schools and what that's going to be like in the fall, and, you know, you might have situations where a school is open on Monday and Tuesday and suddenly it's shut on Wednesday, or a child is in group A and that means they're going to school this week but not that week. And how are you supposed to go to your employer and say, oh, I'm sorry, I have to have Thursday and next Tuesday off, but I'll be back on Wednesday, but only for the morning because the children need to be picked up because of the COVID cleaning? I mean, it's just, and who's picking up that burden? It's the mothers.
It's the mothers.
Mostly.
So, you know, the whole Cuomo thing is so interesting. I mean, we've obviously seen many men being outed for horrific things. Others for, you know, they're part of a generation that was, I mean, you can't change stupid, right? I mean, so, and it is such a hard thing. And I'm so tired of that male patriarchal bullshit, and I'm not really sure how we end that.
I know, but when you put women in charge, maybe things start to change a little bit.
Maybe.
And when you put women in the economic seat of deciding who gets VC funding and who doesn't, maybe that starts to change a little bit. These aren't things that are going to change overnight. And you know what? The leopard doesn't change its spot. And that's what I mean a little bit about the rubber band going back to its original shape.
Exactly.
But hopefully, with the younger generation, hopefully in having these conversations, hopefully in seeing female role models on the political stage, my children won't think it's weird to have a female vice president or female president.
Mm-hmm.
They will think it's, why are you even raising it, mummy? Of course. We have one. We have a female vice president, you know, and sort of having more women in those positions of power, having people like Simone Biles saying, I'm not going to be abused anymore. I'm done. You know what? You can keep all the gold medals. I don't care. I saw a great headline this morning. Is bronze the new gold? And
I saw that.
Yeah, I thought it was. I think it was Fortune. Was it Fortune? I think it was Fortune. And I kind of thought, yes, I'm so glad she got bronze in that particular tournament.
Me too.
That she decided that she wanted to do for herself.
Yes, and she felt great about it.
And she felt great about it. And I think there's so much power in watching a woman like her saying, you know what? I don't have to do this. The system is not going to rule me. I'm going to decide. And it's really shocking to people. And it's not just her. I mean, we've seen it with, you know, Naomi Osaka and people who've said it's enough. It's enough. You know, I'm not your plaything.
Yeah. Well, let's hope sooner than later, but I think it's going to take, all of this is going to take time.
I think so too. Hope you got a long time. Hope you get a seat on the couch and get some popcorn to watch it.
Well, thank you so much for talking. This was a great conversation. Love, you know, hearing about your thoughts and everything that you get to see as a reporter in the New York Times.
Thank you so much. It was great fun. I appreciate it. Ciao.